Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Call That Changed Everything. The satellite phone crackled to life in a makeshift command center deep within the Afghan mountains. Staff Sergeant Christoph Kruger wiped the sweat and dust from his brow as he answered, expecting another mission briefing from command. Instead, a nervous female voice filled the encrypted line. Mr. Kruger? This is Mrs. Helen Waller from Riverside Elementary. I'm calling about your daughter, Lily. Christoph's blood ran cold. In his 12 years of military service, 8 of those in special operations, family calls during deployment meant only one thing: emergency. His mind immediately went to the worst possibilities: accident, injury, death. What happened to my daughter? His voice carried the controlled tension of a man trained to handle crisis. Well, sir, she hasn't had lunch money all week. When we asked her about it, she said her mother took it for something important. We were wondering if. Put her on the phone. The command was sharp, final. Daddy. Lily's small voice trembled through the connection, and Christoph's heart clenched. At 8 years old, she shouldn't sound so frightened. Hey, princess, tell Daddy what's going on. Mommy took my lunch money, and when I asked for it back, Vernon got mad. He said I was being selfish. She paused, and Christoph heard her sniffle. Daddy, Vernon hits me when I don't call him Daddy. He says you're not coming back, and he's my new daddy now. The world around Christoph seemed to freeze. The sounds of the forward operating base, generators humming, helicopters in the distance, soldiers talking, all faded into white noise. In that moment, the careful emotional walls he'd built during years of black operations began to crack. But not from sadness. From pure, unadulterated rage. Christoph Kruger wasn't just any soldier. His official record showed a decorated staff sergeant with multiple deployments and commendations. What it didn't show was his real work: psychological operations, targeted elimination, and the kind of missions that didn't officially exist. He was a ghost who created other ghosts. A shadow who understood that sometimes the greatest weapons weren't bullets or bombs, but fear and broken minds. Lily, baby, listen to me carefully, he said, forcing his voice to remain calm. Daddy is coming home very soon. Can you stay with Grandma Bernice for a few days? Mommy said Grandma is trying to steal me away from her. Of course Carmen would poison their daughter against his mother. Bernice Kruger had never liked Carmen, calling her shallow and opportunistic from the beginning. Christoph had dismissed it as typical mother-in-law bias. Now he realized his mother had seen something he'd been too blind to notice. Lily, I need you to do something very important for Daddy. Can you be brave? Yes, Daddy. If Vernon ever hurts you again, I want you to go to your room and call Grandma. Can you remember her number? After ensuring Lily could recite the number, Christoph ended the call with his daughter and immediately dialed his wife. Carmen answered on the 4th ring, and he could hear music and laughter in the background. Chris, why are you calling? I thought you couldn't use phones over there. Carmen, why doesn't Lily have lunch money? A pause, then defensive anger. I needed it for a spa day. I've been stressed dealing with everything alone while you're off playing soldier. Playing soldier? The words came out deadly quiet. Look, I didn't sign up to raise your brat by myself. She's becoming a real handful, always asking about you, always wanting attention. It's exhausting. Vernon thinks maybe she needs more discipline. Vernon, my boyfriend. Well, technically my fiancé now. She giggled, the sound like nails on a chalkboard to Christoph's ears. He proposed last week. We're thinking a Christmas wedding. You're still married to me, Carmen. Not for long. My lawyer says since you're never here anyway, it should be easy to prove abandonment. Oh, and Chris, don't expect to see much of Lily after the divorce. Vernon thinks it would be better if she had a stable father figure instead of some part-time soldier. The line went dead. For several minutes, Christoph sat in absolute silence, processing what had just happened. Around him, his team continued their mission prep, unaware that their team leader was planning an entirely different kind of operation. Christoph had been married to Carmen for 9 years, and he'd thought their relationship was solid. They'd met when he was a young soldier stationed at Fort Bragg, and she was working as a waitress near the base. She'd seemed impressed by his confidence and drive, and he'd been drawn to her apparent sweetness and charm. Looking back now, he could see the signs he'd missed. How she'd always been more interested in the benefits of being a military wife than in him as a person. How she'd grown more distant with each deployment. How she'd started finding excuses not to visit him during his brief returns home. But Lily was innocent in all of this. His daughter was being hurt, manipulated, and emotionally abused while he was thousands of miles away, unable to protect her. That ended now. Christoph walked to his commanding officer's tent. Major Spencer Barlow looked up from his mission reports, noting the expression on his subordinate's face. Problem, Kruger? Family emergency, sir. I need to request immediate leave. Barlow studied him carefully. He'd worked with Christoph long enough to know that the man didn't request anything lightly. How immediate. Next flight out. That's serious? Christoph met his commander's eyes. My wife is divorcing me and trying to keep my daughter from me. Her new boyfriend is physically abusing my child. Barlow didn't hesitate. Consider done. I'll have you on the supply flight tomorrow morning. As Christoph packed his gear that night, his mind was already working through possibilities. He'd spent years learning how to destroy enemies through psychological manipulation, how to dismantle lives systematically and completely. Those skills weren't limited to foreign combatants. Carmen and Vernon had made the mistake of threatening the one thing in the world that Christoph Kruger would kill for, his daughter. They had no idea what was coming for them. Chapter 2. The Hunter Returns. 24 hours later, Christoph stood in the Baltimore airport, wearing civilian clothes and carrying a single duffel bag. To anyone looking, he appeared to be just another soldier returning from deployment. They couldn't see the cold calculation in his eyes or the detailed plans already forming in his mind. His first stop was a car rental agency, where he selected a nondescript sedan with tinted windows. His second stop was a shopping mall, where he purchased a variety of items that would have seemed random to an observer. Prepaid phones, small recording devices, a high-end camera with telephoto lens, and several changes of clothes that would help him blend into different environments. Christoph had learned long ago that the best intelligence operations began with thorough reconnaissance. Before he made any moves against Carmen and Vernon, he needed to understand their routines, their weaknesses, and their secrets. He drove to his old neighborhood in the suburbs of Norfolk, Virginia, parking 3 blocks away from the house he'd bought for his family 5 years earlier. Using the telephoto lens, he began surveillance of his own home. The house looked different. Carmen had clearly redecorated, and there was a black pickup truck in the driveway that he didn't recognize. Through the windows, he could see movement, his wife and a man he assumed was Vernon. For 2 hours, Christoph watched and photographed. At 3:15 p.m., a school bus stopped in front of the house, and Lily stepped off. She walked slowly to the front door, her shoulders slumped in a way that broke her father's heart. Through his telephoto lens, Christoph watched as Vernon opened the door. Even from a distance, he could see the man's aggressive body language as he spoke to Lily. When she tried to walk past him into the house, Vernon grabbed her arm roughly and pulled her back, pointing his finger in her face. Christoph's hands tightened on the camera, but he forced himself to remain calm and continue documenting. Evidence first, justice second. That evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Christoph watched Carmen and Vernon through the living room window. They were drinking wine and laughing, completely oblivious to the predator studying them from the shadows. Vernon Waters was exactly what Christoph had expected. Mid-30s, average height, soft around the middle from too much beer and too little exercise. He wore expensive clothes and drove an expensive truck, but everything about him screamed insecurity. The kind of man who bullied children and women to feel powerful. Carmen had changed too. Her hair was different, bleached blonde instead of her natural brown, and she clearly had some cosmetic work done. She clung to Vernon's arm like a trophy girlfriend, laughing too loudly at his jokes and constantly touching him in a way that was almost desperate. They looked like exactly what they were, shallow, selfish people who'd found each other. Over the next 3 days, Christoph built detailed profiles of their lives. Vernon owned a small construction company that specialized in residential remodeling. He had a reputation for cutting corners and overcharging clients, but but he was charismatic enough to keep getting new business. He spent most evenings at a bar called Murphy's Tavern, where he played pool and flirted with the waitresses despite being engaged to Carmen. Carmen had quit her part-time job at a boutique and was now living entirely off Vernon's income and Christoph's military benefits. She spent her days shopping, getting spa treatments, and meeting with her divorce lawyer, a sleazy ambulance chaser named Ray Kemp who specialized in taking military men to the cleaners. But most importantly, Christoph learned their schedule. Vernon left for work at 7 a.m. every morning. Carmen dropped Lily off at school at 8:15, then usually went to the gym or shopping until mid-afternoon. Lily walked home from school and was often alone with Vernon for 2 hours before Carmen returned. It was during one of these surveillance sessions that Christoph witnessed what would fuel his plans for revenge. He was positioned in his car across from the elementary school when Lily's bus arrived. Instead of the usual drooping shoulders, his daughter ran excitedly toward the house, clutching what looked like an art project. She burst through the front door with genuine joy for the first time since Christoph had been watching. Through his telephoto lens, he saw Vernon meet her at the door. Lily held up her artwork, a drawing that said, "My family," across the top. Even from a distance, Christoph could see that she'd drawn 3 figures. Herself, a woman labeled Mommy, and a man in military uniform labeled Daddy. Vernon snatched the paper from her hands, looked at it, and tore it in half. Then he grabbed Lily by the shoulders and shook her, his face red with anger. When she started crying, he slapped her across the face hard enough that she fell to the ground. Christoph was out of his car and halfway across the street before his training kicked in. He forced himself to stop, to think, to plan. Charging in now would accomplish nothing except alerting them to his presence and potentially losing him access to his daughter permanently. But as he watched Vernon drag his crying daughter into the house and slam the door, Christoph made a decision that would reshape 3 lives forever. Vernon Waters was going to suffer in ways he couldn't imagine. And Carmen. Carmen was going to learn what happened to people who threatened Christoph Kruger's family. That night, Christoph made a call to an old contact from his special operations days, a man who owed him favors and asked no questions. Within hours, he had access to financial records, criminal background checks, and personal information that would make both Vernon and Carmen very uncomfortable if it became public. But money and reputation were just the beginning. Christoph's specialty had always been psychological warfare, and he'd learned that the most devastating attacks weren't physical. They were emotional and mental. He was going to dismantle their lives piece by piece, and they would never see it coming until it was far too late. The hunter had returned home, and the prey had no idea they were already in his crosshairs. Chapter 3. The Setup. Christoph's first move came at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. He waited in the parking lot of Vernon's construction company until he saw the black pickup truck pull in. Vernon was predictably early, arriving 30 minutes before his crew to set up the day's jobs. Using skills honed in overseas operations, Christoph approached the building through the blind spot of the security cameras. Vernon had left his truck unlocked, a mistake that would cost him dearly. Inside the truck's glove compartment, Christoph found exactly what he'd hoped for: insurance papers, registration, and a small bag of cocaine hidden behind the owner's manual. He photographed everything, then carefully placed a GPS tracker underneath the vehicle's rear bumper. But the real prize was Vernon's phone, left charging on the dashboard. Christoph had 90 seconds before Vernon would return from unlocking the building. Using a device acquired through his military contacts, he cloned the phone's contents, downloading text messages, call logs, photos, and contacts. Among the photos, Christoph found exactly what he'd expected: images of Vernon with other women, including several that were clearly taken while he was supposedly in a committed relationship with Carmen. But more disturbing were the messages between Vernon and his ex-wife, Denise Waters, discussing their shared custody arrangement for their 10-year-old son, Andy. The messages revealed a pattern of manipulation and threats. Vernon routinely used access to his son as leverage against Denise, demanding money and favors in exchange for not causing problems during custody exchanges. When she couldn't pay, he would show up late for pickups or cancel visits altogether, leaving the boy confused and hurt. Christoph now understood exactly what kind of man he was dealing with, a predator who used children as weapons against the women in his life. That evening, Christoph made his first direct contact with the enemy camp. He called Carmen's phone from one of his prepaid devices, disguising his voice with a slight southern accent. Carmen Star? This is Carmen. Who is this? My name is Calvin Lawson. I'm a private investigator hired by your husband's commanding officer. There's been some concerns raised about irregularities in Sergeant Kruger's financial accounts, and we need to verify some information with you. He could practically hear Carmen's excitement through the phone. What kind of irregularities? I'm not at liberty to discuss details over the phone, ma'am, but there may be significant financial penalties involved. Would you be available to meet tomorrow afternoon to review some documents? They arranged to meet at a coffee shop downtown. Carmen was so eager to cooperate with anything that might hurt Christoph financially that she didn't think to ask for credentials or verification. The next day, Christoph watched from across the street as Carmen waited in the coffee shop for 45 minutes for a private investigator who would never appear. But her phone conversation with Vernon afterward was worth the deception. He never showed up, Carmen complained. But he said Chris might be in financial trouble with the military. Maybe we can use that in the divorce. Good. Vernon's voice carried clearly through the listening device Christoph had planted on her car. The sooner we get rid of him, the better. Kids started to ask too many questions about when her daddy's coming home. I told her he might not come back at all, Carmen replied. Maybe if he dies over there, we won't have to deal with any of this custody crap. Listening to his wife casually discuss his death while his daughter grieved for him was the final straw. Any lingering doubt about the morality of his planned revenge evaporated completely. That night, Christoph paid a visit to his mother. Bernice Kruger lived 20 minutes away in a small but immaculate house that she'd shared with her late husband for 30 years. At 62, she was still sharp as a tack and had never fully trusted Carmen. I knew something was wrong when you stopped calling, Bernice said after Christoph explained the situation. That woman has been poisoning Lily against our whole family. I need you to file for emergency custody, Christoph told her. I'll provide evidence of the abuse. You should have listened to me about her years ago, Bernice said sadly. But we'll get Lily back. Whatever it takes. It's going to get messy, Mom. Carmen and Vernon aren't going to give up without a fight. Bernice Kruger looked at her son with steely determination. Then we'll give them a fight they'll never forget. While his mother worked with a family law attorney to build a custody case, Christoph initiated the next phase of his plan. Using the financial information he'd gathered, he discovered that Vernon's construction company was operating with several expired licenses and had been cited multiple times for safety violations. A few anonymous tips to the appropriate regulatory agencies would shut down Vernon's business within weeks, but Christoph wanted something more devastating than mere financial hardship. He wanted to destroy Vernon's reputation, his relationships, and his sense of security. He wanted the man who had hurt his daughter to understand what real fear felt like. The plan he devised was elegant in its simplicity and brutal in its execution. Over the next 2 weeks, he would systematically dismantle every aspect of Vernon and Carmen's lives, while simultaneously building an ironclad case for custody of his daughter. Phase 1 involved Vernon's ex-wife, Denise. Using the information gathered from Vernon's phone, Christoph reached out to her through a mutual acquaintance, another military wife who had once been friends with Carmen. Denise Waters was bitter, angry, and eager for revenge against her ex-husband. When presented with evidence of Vernon's current manipulation tactics and threats regarding their son, she immediately agreed to cooperate with any plan that would remove Vernon from Andy's life permanently. That bastard has been using our son as a weapon for 3 years, Denise told Christoph during their clandestine meeting. I've been documenting everything, but I needed more evidence to convince a judge. I can give you more evidence than you'll know what to do with, Christoph assured her. Phase 2 involved Carmen's divorce lawyer, Ray Kemp. The sleazy attorney had made a career of bleeding military families dry, but he'd also made plenty of enemies along the way. Christoph's research revealed that Kemp had several pending ethics violations and at least 3 former clients who were willing to testify about his incompetence and borderline criminal behavior. A few strategic conversations with the right people would ensure that Kemp's license was under review just as Carmen needed him most. But the centerpiece of Kristoff's revenge was Phase 3, a carefully orchestrated campaign of psychological warfare that would leave Vernon paranoid, isolated, and desperate. It would begin with small things, tools missing from his job sites, anonymous calls to his clients suggesting problems with his work, subtle signs that someone was watching him. Vernon would initially dismiss these incidents as coincidence or bad luck. Then the pressure would increase. Photographic evidence of his affairs would find their way to Carmen. Evidence of his drug use would reach his parole officer from a previous arrest. His truck would develop mysterious mechanical problems at the worst possible moments. By the time Vernon realized he was under attack, Kristoff would already have dismantled his entire life. And the beauty of the plan was that Vernon would never be able to prove who was responsible. As Kristoff finalized the details of his revenge, he allowed himself one moment of satisfaction. Carmen and Vernon had thought they could steal his daughter and destroy his family while he was deployed, believing he was powerless to stop them. They were about to learn that Kristoff Kruger was never powerless. He was just patient. The war was about to begin, and only one side knew they were fighting. Chapter 4. First Strike. The attack began on a Monday morning with surgical precision. Vernon arrived at his first job site to find that someone had vandalized his truck overnight. All 4 tires slashed, windows smashed, and paint keyed along both sides. The damage totaled nearly $3,000, and his insurance company informed him it would take weeks to process the claim. Probably some punk kids, the police officer taking the report suggested. We've had a lot of vandalism in this area lately. But Kristoff wasn't done. While Vernon dealt with police and insurance companies, anonymous tips reached 3 different city agencies. By noon, inspectors were swarming Vernon's active job sites, finding violations that would shut down 2 major projects indefinitely. This doesn't make sense, Vernon complained to Carmen that evening. Everything was fine last week. Now, suddenly everyone's giving me problems. Carmen was too distracted by her own crisis to offer much sympathy. Her divorce lawyer, Ray Kemp, had called that morning to inform her that the Virginia State Bar was investigating multiple ethics violations against him, and he might need to withdraw from her case. What does that mean for our divorce? Carmen had demanded. It means you need to find new representation, Kemp had replied nervously, and be prepared to start over from scratch. Meanwhile, across town, Denise Waters was meeting with her own attorney, armed with a thick folder of evidence documenting Vernon's psychological abuse of their son. The custody modification hearing will be scheduled within 2 weeks. But Kristoff's most satisfying victory came that afternoon when he drove to Lily's school. As her father, he still had legal rights to see his daughter, despite Carmen's attempts to poison their relationship. "Daddy!" Lily's face lit up when she saw him waiting by the school entrance. She ran into his arms, and he felt his heart breaking at how thin she'd become. "I've missed you so much, princess," he whispered in her hair. "Mommy said you weren't coming back," Lily said quietly. "She said you didn't love us anymore. Your mommy was wrong, baby. I will always love you, and I will always come back for you." They spent 2 hours at a nearby park, where Lily finally relaxed enough to tell him about life at home. Vernon's abuse was even worse than Kristoff had suspected. Psychological manipulation, verbal threats, and physical intimidation designed to break down an 8-year-old spirit. "He makes me call him daddy," Lily whispered. "And when I say I already have a daddy, he gets really mad. You listen to me, Lily. You only have one daddy, and that's me. No one can ever change that." When it was time to take her home, Lily begged him not to leave her there. "I'm working on that, princess. But I need you to be brave for a little while longer. Can you do that for Daddy?" That evening, Kristoff initiated Phase 2 of his psychological campaign against Vernon. Using skills learned in military intelligence, he began a systematic surveillance program designed to make Vernon feel constantly watched. It started subtly, a car parked across from his house for an hour each night, always in a different location, but always visible from Vernon's bedroom window. Anonymous calls to his cell phone at random hours, hanging up as soon as he answered. Small items moved or missing from his truck when he left it parked outside bars or restaurants. By Wednesday, Vernon was already showing signs of paranoia. He'd started checking his rearview mirror constantly while driving and had installed new locks on his house. "I think someone's following me," he told Carmen nervously. "You're being ridiculous," she replied, but Christoph could hear the doubt in her voice through the listening devices he'd planted. Thursday brought a new escalation. Vernon arrived at work to find that someone had broken into his office trailer and gone through his files. Nothing appeared to be missing, but sensitive client information had been photographed and copied. The police were called again, but with no witnesses and no evidence, there was little they could do except file another report. "This is getting creepy," Vernon told his foreman. "First my truck, now this. Someone's definitely targeting me." What Vernon didn't know was that Christoph had photographed client contracts that contained several illegal clauses and evidence of tax evasion. This information would soon find its way to the IRS and the Better Business Bureau. But the real psychological blow came Friday evening. Vernon returned home from work to find an envelope taped to his front door. Inside were high-resolution photographs of him with 3 different women at 3 different bars, all taken within the past 2 weeks. There was no note, no demands, just the photos and the implied message. Someone was watching him closely enough to document his every move. Vernon burst through the front door in a rage, waving the photos at Carmen. "Someone's been following me. They know about." He stopped, realizing he was about to confess to his affairs in front of his fiancée. Carmen snatched the photos from his hands, her face growing white as she recognized the women in the pictures. "Who are these sluts?" she demanded. "Nobody. Just women from the bar. We were just talking." "Talking?" Carmen's voice rose to a shriek. "You're buying them drinks and feeling them up, and you call that talking?" The fight that followed was spectacular. Christoph listened to every word through his surveillance equipment, recording Carmen's accusations and Vernon's increasingly desperate denials. By Saturday morning, Carmen had thrown Vernon out of the house. He was staying at a cheap motel, paranoid and isolated, while she was consulting with a new divorce attorney about her options. But Christoph's cruelest stroke was yet to come. Sunday afternoon, while Vernon was drowning his sorrows at Murphy's Tavern, Christoph made an anonymous call to Child Protective Services. "I'd like to report suspected child abuse," he told the intake worker, providing Lily's name, address, and a detailed account of the incidents he'd witnessed and documented. The investigation would begin within 48 hours, and given the evidence Christoph had compiled, there was no doubt about the outcome. As he watched Vernon's life crumble in real time, Christoph felt no satisfaction, only cold determination. This was just the beginning. Vernon and Carmen had hurt his daughter and tried to steal his family. The price they would pay was just getting started. Phase 3 would be even more devastating than Phase 2, and by the time Christoph was finished, Vernon Waters would wish he'd never heard the name Kruger. The hunter was methodically destroying his prey, and the best part was that Vernon still had no idea who was stalking him. Chapter 5: The Tightening Noose. Vernon Waters was coming apart at the seams, and everyone could see it. The confident, swaggering contractor who had wooed Carmen away from her deployed husband had been replaced by a paranoid wreck who jumped at shadows and saw threats everywhere. His business was hemorrhaging money. 3 major contracts had been canceled after city inspectors found violations. His insurance company was disputing the vandalism claim, and the IRS had launched an audit based on anonymous tips about unreported income. His phone rang constantly with creditors, angry clients, and bureaucrats demanding answers he couldn't provide. Even worse, the photographs had shattered his relationship with Carmen. She'd thrown him out of the house and was now telling anyone who would listen about his pathological cheating and obvious mental breakdown. "He's become completely unhinged," Carmen complained to her sister during a phone call Christoph monitored. "He's convinced someone's out to get him, but he can't tell me who or why. Honestly, I think he's having some kind of psychotic episode." What Carmen didn't know was that her own world was about to collapse even more dramatically than Vernon's. Christoph had spent weeks building a comprehensive case against both of them, but his real masterpiece was the trap he'd set for Carmen herself. Using the intelligence he'd gathered about her habits and weaknesses, he'd crafted an approach that would expose her true nature to everyone who mattered. It began with a carefully orchestrated meeting at Carmen's favorite upscale restaurant. Christoph, wearing an expensive suit and using the alias Gabriel Mejia, approached her table where she was dining alone. "Excuse me, aren't you Carmen Kruger? The one who's been in the news about that tragic military widow case?" Carmen looked confused. "I'm Carmen Starr, but I'm not a widow. My husband is still deployed." "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry," Gabriel/Christoph said, feigning embarrassment. "I must have you confused with someone else. Although, you are exactly the type of woman I'm looking for." He handed her an elegant business card. "I'm Gabriel Mejia, a casting director for Lifetime Network. We're producing a documentary about military families dealing with deployment stress, and you have exactly the look we want for our lead interview subject." Carmen's eyes lit up with interest. The prospect of being on television appealed to her massive ego. "We're offering $5,000 for a day's filming," Gabriel continued, "plus potential opportunities for follow-up appearances if the documentary is successful." He'd chosen the bait perfectly. Carmen was facing financial pressure with Vernon's business failing and her divorce attorney demanding a larger retainer. The money was tempting, but the fame was irresistible. "What would I need to do?" she asked. "Just be honest about your experiences as a military wife. Talk about the challenges, the loneliness, how deployment affects relationships." Very straightforward stuff. They scheduled a preliminary interview for the following week at a professional studio that Christoph had rented under the Gabriel Mejia identity. Meanwhile, Vernon's situation continued to deteriorate. Child Protective Services had visited the house twice, interviewing both Carmen and Lily separately. While they hadn't removed Lily from the home yet, a social worker named Whitney McCormick was scheduled for regular check-ins. "This is all your fault," Carmen screamed at Vernon during one of their increasingly frequent phone arguments. "Ever since you moved in, everything's gone to hell. First your psycho ex-wife gets our address, then CPS shows up, now you're bringing your crazy stalker problems to my house." Vernon was indeed being stalked, though not by anyone he could identify or catch. Christoph had enlisted the help of 3 other Special Operations veterans, Spencer Barlow, Hector Tuttle, and Melvin Vincent, who were all on leave and happy to help a brother in arms settle scores with someone who abused children. The 4-man team took turns conducting surveillance on Vernon, ensuring he was never truly alone but never able to identify his watchers. They followed him to bars, job sites, and his cheap motel, always staying just visible enough to maintain his paranoia. "I'm telling you, it's the same guys," Vernon insisted to anyone who would listen. 3 or 4 different men, always watching me. This isn't random." But when he called the police, they found no evidence of stalking. The men were always in public places where they had every right to be, never approaching or threatening him directly. The psychological pressure was exactly what Christoph had intended. Vernon was drinking more, sleeping less, and making increasingly erratic decisions that pushed away the few friends and business contacts he had left. The breakthrough Christoph had been waiting for came on a Thursday evening. Vernon, drunk and desperate, called his ex-wife Denise in violation of their custody agreement. "This is all your fault," he shouted into the phone. "You set them on me. You hired people to destroy my life." "I don't know what you're talking about," Denise replied calmly, recording the conversation as her lawyer had advised. "But if you call here again, I'm notifying the police. I'll take Andy away from you," Vernon threatened. "I'll tell the court you're an unfit mother. The call ended when Denise hung up, but the damage was done. Vernon had just provided evidence of harassment and threats that would ensure he lost all custody rights to his son. Meanwhile, Christoph's trap for Carmen was entering its final phase. She arrived at the rented studio precisely on time, dressed in her most expensive outfit and clearly excited about her television debut. "The cameras are already rolling," Gabriel/Christoph explained, "so we can capture natural reactions. Just relax and be honest." For 45 minutes, Carmen talked freely about her life as a military wife. But as Christoph had anticipated, her narcissism and need for attention led her to reveal far more than she intended. "Honestly, I think military wives like me are heroes too," she said earnestly. "We sacrifice just as much as the soldiers do, maybe more. I mean, they chose to join the military. We didn't choose to be left alone for months at a time. When asked about her current situation, Carmen painted herself as a victim of abandonment and abuse. My husband changed after his deployments, she lied smoothly. He became distant, cold, almost abusive. I tried to make it work for our daughter's sake, but eventually I had to protect myself and Lily from his anger. The fictional narrative continued, with Carmen describing Vernon as a lifeline who had saved her and Lily from a dangerous situation. Vernon is wonderful with Lily, she claimed. He's been more of a father to her in 6 months than Chris was in 8 years. But the real revelations came when Carmen thought the interview was over. As Christoph pretended to pack up equipment, Carmen chatted casually about her plans. The divorce should be final soon, she said. My lawyer thinks I can get full custody plus alimony and child support. Chris will probably never see Lily again, which is honestly better for everyone. When asked about Vernon's recent problems, Carmen laughed dismissively. He's been acting paranoid lately, claiming someone's following him. Honestly, I think the stress of taking on a ready-made family is getting to him. He might not be husband material after all. She paused, then added with shocking callousness. If Vernon doesn't work out, there are plenty of other men interested in a young, attractive single mother. Military widows are very popular these days. The interview ended with Carmen signing a release form, completely unaware that she'd just provided devastating evidence of her true character and intentions. Within hours, copies of the recording were delivered to her new divorce attorney, the Child Protective Services caseworker, and the family court judge handling her custody case. Carmen had just destroyed her own credibility while thinking she was becoming a television star. As Phase 5 approached, Christoph reflected on how perfectly his plan was unfolding. Vernon was isolated, paranoid, and financially ruined. Carmen had exposed herself as a manipulative narcissist willing to lie under oath. Most importantly, Lily would soon be safe from both of them. But Christoph wasn't finished. The final phase would be the most devastating of all, designed to ensure that Vernon and Carmen never forgot the price of threatening his family. Justice was coming, and it would be absolute. Chapter 6: The Perfect Storm. The Child Protective Services hearing took place on a gray Wednesday morning in a sterile conference room that smelled of stale coffee and broken dreams. Carmen sat at one end of the long table, flanked by her new attorney, a tired-looking public defender named Chester Harden, who'd taken her case pro bono after Ray Kemp's suspension. Across from them sat Whitney McCormick, the CPS caseworker, along with her supervisor and a court-appointed child advocate. At the far end of the table, Bernice Kruger waited with the family law attorney Christoph had hired for the custody case. Carmen was confident, even smug. She'd convinced herself that her carefully crafted image as a struggling military wife would carry the day. She had no idea that her television interview was about to destroy everything she'd built. Mrs. Starr, Whitney McCormick began, consulting her notes. We've received some concerning reports about the home environment for your daughter, Lily. Can you tell us about your relationship with Vernon Waters? Vernon has been wonderful for our family, Carmen replied smoothly, using the same lies she told Gabriel/Christoph. He stepped in when my husband abandoned us, and he's been more of a father to Lily than Chris ever was. Are you aware that Mr. Waters was arrested for domestic violence against his previous wife? Carmen's confidence wavered slightly. That was a misunderstanding. Denise is bitter about their divorce and made false accusations. Whitney slid a photograph across the table. This was taken 2 weeks ago. Can you explain the bruising on your daughter's arm? The photo showed Lily getting off the school bus, and clearly visible on her upper arm were finger-shaped bruises consistent with being grabbed forcefully. She falls down a lot, Carmen said quickly. She's always been clumsy. Interesting, because when we interviewed Lily privately, she told us that Vernon grabbed her when she refused to call him daddy. She also described several incidents of verbal intimidation and threats. Carmen's lawyer started to object, but Whitney continued. We also have this recording, which was provided to us by an anonymous source. The room filled with Carmen's own voice, speaking to the fake documentary crew. My lawyer thinks I can get full custody plus alimony and child support. Chris will probably never see Lily again, which is honestly better for everyone. Carmen's face went white as her own words convicted her of parental alienation and perjury. But Whitney wasn't finished. In this same recording, you describe your husband as abusive and claim that Mr. Waters has been a positive influence on Lily. However, you also say that if your relationship with Mr. Waters doesn't work out, there are plenty of other men interested in a young, attractive single mother. Does that sound like someone genuinely concerned about their child's welfare? The court-appointed child advocate leaned forward. Mrs. Starr, based on this evidence and our interviews with Lily, we're recommending immediate removal from your custody pending a full investigation. You can't do this, Carmen screamed, her carefully maintained facade finally cracking. I'm a good mother. Chris is the one who abandoned us. Actually, Bernice Kruger's attorney interjected. Sergeant Kruger has been granted emergency leave and is available to take custody of his daughter immediately. At that moment, as if summoned by divine timing, Christoph walked into the conference room. He was wearing his dress military uniform, every ribbon and decoration perfectly placed, looking every inch the decorated soldier he was. Carmen stared at him in shock. Chris? But you're supposed to be in Afghanistan. Emergency family leave, he replied coldly, not even looking at her. His attention was focused entirely on Whitney McCormick. I have documentation of the abuse my daughter has suffered, and I'm prepared to provide a safe, stable home environment. The hearing concluded with temporary custody being awarded to Christoph, pending a full court review in 30 days. Carmen would be allowed supervised visitation only, and Vernon Waters was barred from any contact with Lily whatsoever. As they left the courthouse, Carmen grabbed Christoph's arm. You planned this, she hissed. You came back just to destroy my life. Christoph looked at her with the same cold expression he'd once reserved for enemy combatants. You destroyed your own life the moment you decided to hurt my daughter. This isn't over. I'll fight you in court. I'll prove you're an unfit father. With what money? Vernon's business is finished. Your lawyer is suspended, and you have no income. Good luck finding someone willing to take your case when that recording becomes public record. Carmen's face crumpled as the reality of her situation hit her. She was broke, homeless, and had just lost custody of the child she'd been using as a meal ticket. Meanwhile, across town, Vernon Waters was discovering that his own nightmare was far from over. He'd managed to secure one final construction job, a small bathroom renovation that would barely cover his mounting debts. But when he arrived at the job site, he found police waiting for him. Vernon Waters, you're under arrest for tax evasion, fraud, and violation of multiple city construction codes, the lead detective announced. The arrest was the culmination of weeks of anonymous tips and evidence gathering. Every shortcut Vernon had taken, every corner he'd cut, every dollar he'd hidden from the IRS, it had all been carefully documented and delivered to the appropriate authorities. But the cruelest blow came when Vernon was allowed his one phone call from the county jail. He called Carmen, desperate for bail money and emotional support. Carmen, thank God. I've been arrested. I need you to. Don't call me again, Carmen interrupted. I've lost custody of Lily because of you. My life is ruined because I got involved with a loser who couldn't handle his own problems. Carmen, please. I love you. We can work through this. Love. Carmen laughed bitterly. I never loved you, Vernon. You were just convenient while Chris was deployed. Now you're nothing but a liability. The line went dead, leaving Vernon alone in his cell with the devastating realization that everything he thought he had, his business, his relationship, his future, had been an illusion. That evening, Christoph sat in his childhood bedroom at his mother's house, reading bedtime stories to Lily. She was still fragile, still processing the trauma of the past 6 months, but for the first time since his return, she seemed genuinely happy. Daddy, are you going to stay home now? She asked sleepily. For a while, princess. And when I have to go back to work, you'll stay with Grandma Bernice, where you'll be safe. What about Mommy? Christoph considered his words carefully. Despite everything Carmen had done, Lily still loved her mother and didn't deserve to be poisoned against her the way Carmen had tried to poison her against him. Mommy made some bad choices, sweetheart, but that doesn't mean she doesn't love you. Sometimes grown-ups need time to figure things out. As Lily drifted off to sleep, Kristoff stepped onto the porch where his mother was waiting with a cup of coffee. "How long did you plan all this?" Bernice asked. "From the moment I heard Vernon had hit her," Kristoff replied honestly. "No regrets." Kristoff thought about Vernon sitting in jail, facing years of legal battles and financial ruin. He thought about Carmen, homeless and broke, finally forced to confront the consequences of her selfishness. Most importantly, he thought about Lily, safe and healing in a house filled with genuine love. None whatsoever. The war was effectively over. Carmen and Vernon had been neutralized as threats to his daughter's safety and well-being. But Kristoff wasn't the type of man who settled for mere victory. He wanted total, absolute defeat for anyone who dared threaten his family. The final phase of his revenge would ensure that Vernon Waters and Carmen Starr understood exactly what happened to people who crossed Kristoff Kruger. Justice wasn't complete until the lesson was permanent. Chapter 7. Total Annihilation. 6 weeks after the custody hearing, Vernon Waters sat in his cramped studio apartment, staring at an eviction notice. The few $1,000s he'd managed to scrape together for bail had depleted his last resources, and his court-appointed attorney had made it clear that a plea bargain was his only hope of avoiding serious prison time. But Vernon's legal troubles were just the beginning of his problems. Kristoff had spent the intervening weeks orchestrating a campaign of systematic destruction that went far beyond financial ruin. Every person in Vernon's life had received carefully crafted information about his true nature. His elderly parents had been sent copies of police reports documenting his domestic violence arrests. His ex-military friends had received details about his drug use and child abuse. Even his bowling league had been informed about his fraud convictions. The social isolation was devastating. Vernon had gone from being a moderately successful small businessman with an active social life to being a pariah that nobody wanted to associate with. But Kristoff's masterstroke was yet to come. Using contacts from his intelligence background, Kristoff had arranged for Vernon to be placed in a holding cell with Anthony Buchanan, a career criminal who had strong opinions about men who hurt children. Anthony had been given very specific information about Vernon's crimes against Lily. "You the guy who beats up little girls?" Anthony asked during Vernon's third night in jail. "I never beat anyone," Vernon protested weakly. "That's not what I heard. I heard you like to smack around 8-year-old kids who won't call you daddy." The beating that followed left Vernon with 2 cracked ribs, a broken nose, and a deep understanding that his reputation had preceded him into the criminal justice system. When he was finally released on bail, Vernon discovered that his problems extended far beyond jail. Someone had been very busy destroying every aspect of his former life. His apartment had been burglarized, with thieves taking his television, computer, and anything else of value. The police report was filed, but nothing would ever be recovered. His truck, already damaged from the initial vandalism, had suffered additional accidents. Brake lines had been cut, the transmission had been sabotaged, and the engine had been filled with sand. The insurance company was now refusing to pay any claims, citing suspicious circumstances. Most devastatingly, someone had contacted every woman Vernon had ever dated, including the ones he'd cheated with during his relationship with Carmen. Each had received photos and evidence of his infidelity, along with details about his arrests and financial problems. "You're a lying, cheating scumbag," his most recent conquest, Stephanie Newman, told him when he tried to call. "And apparently you beat up kids too. Don't ever contact me again." The isolation was complete. Vernon had no money, no transportation, no friends, and no prospects for rebuilding any aspect of his life. Meanwhile, Carmen was discovering that her own situation was equally hopeless. The fake documentary interview had been edited into a devastating highlight reel that showcased her narcissism, lies, and callous disregard for her daughter's welfare. Her family had disowned her after watching her casually discuss treating Lily as a meal ticket. Her few friends had abandoned her when they realized she'd been manipulating them with false stories about Kristoff's supposed abuse. Most cruelly, every man she tried to date received copies of the interview within days of their first contact. Her reputation as a lying, manipulative gold digger had spread through her entire social circle. "You're toxic," Her sister Lorraine had told her during their final phone conversation. Mom and Dad are ashamed to have you as a daughter, and frankly, so am I. But Christoph wasn't satisfied with mere social exile. He wanted both Vernon and Carmen to understand that their suffering was intentional, personal, and permanent. The revelation came on a cold Friday evening when both Vernon and Carmen received identical packages at their respective addresses. Inside each package was a single photograph. Christoph in full military gear, standing in front of a destroyed building in Afghanistan. On the back of each photo, in Christoph's precise handwriting, was a simple message. You thought I was just a cook. You were wrong. Along with the photo was a detailed dossier outlining Christoph's real military background. Special operations, psychological warfare specialist, multiple classified missions, and commendations for operations that officially didn't exist. Vernon stared at the documents with growing horror, finally understanding who had been hunting him for the past 3 months. Every mysterious incident, every piece of bad luck, every perfectly timed disaster, it had all been orchestrated by a man trained to destroy enemies of the United States. Carmen's reaction was even more dramatic. She called Christoph immediately, screaming hysterically into the phone. You destroyed my life. You ruined everything. You destroyed your own life when you decided to abuse my daughter, Christoph replied calmly. I just made sure everyone knew who you really are. I'll go to the police. I'll tell them you stalked us, that you planted evidence. Feel free, but you might want to consider how that conversation will go. You'll be accusing a decorated special operations veteran of crimes you can't prove, while he has recordings of you admitting to parental alienation, fraud, and child endangerment. Carmen sobbed into the phone. What do you want from me? Nothing. You're no longer a threat to my daughter, which means you're no longer relevant to my life. Chris, please. I know I made mistakes, but you didn't make mistakes, Carmen. You made choices. You chose to betray your marriage, abandon your daughter, and align yourself with a man who abused children. Those weren't mistakes. They were character revelations. The line went dead, leaving Carmen alone with the devastating knowledge that her destruction had been planned and executed by someone who viewed her as nothing more than a mission objective. That night, Vernon made a decision that would define the rest of his pathetic existence. He wrote a letter to Christoph, hand-delivered to his mother's house. I know you're the one who destroyed my life. I know you're watching me. I'm not going to run or hide or pretend this is random anymore. You won. I'm broken, I'm finished, and I understand that crossing you was the biggest mistake of my life. I'm leaving town. I won't contact Carmen, I won't try to see Lily, and I won't cause any more problems for your family. Please let this be over. Christoph read the letter with cold satisfaction. The predator who had hurt his daughter was finally admitting defeat, begging for mercy from someone who had none to give. But mercy was not in Christoph's vocabulary when it came to protecting his family. Vernon would be allowed to leave town, but he would carry the scars of this encounter for the rest of his life. The next morning, Vernon found one final message taped to his apartment door. If you ever come near my family again, if you ever hurt another child, if you ever forget what happens to people who cross me, I will find you. And next time, there won't be any warnings or second chances. Vernon was on a bus out of town by sunset, carrying nothing but a single suitcase and the permanent knowledge that he had been utterly and completely defeated by a superior opponent. Carmen lasted another 2 weeks before she too fled, moving to a distant city where nobody knew her history. But she would never escape the recordings, the documentation, or the reputation that followed her wherever she went. As Christoph watched his enemies scatter like cockroaches exposed to light, he felt no triumph, only the cold satisfaction of a mission completed successfully. His daughter was safe. His family was whole. And anyone who might consider threatening them in the future now had a very clear example of what awaited them. The war was over, and Christoph Kruger had won it completely. Chapter 8. The Reckoning Complete. 2 months later, Christoph sat in a family court judge's chambers for the final custody hearing. Judge Marjorie Marsh had reviewed all the evidence, interviewed all the parties, and reached a conclusion that surprised no one who understood the facts of the case. Sergeant Kruger, the judge began, I've seen many custody cases in my 20 years on the bench, but few have presented such a clear picture of contrasting parental fitness. Carmen sat at the defendant's table with her third attorney in 4 months, an inexperienced public defender who'd been assigned to her case after she'd exhausted her resources. She looked haggard and defeated, a far cry from the confident woman who'd once thought she could manipulate the system in her favor. Your daughter has been through significant trauma, Judge Marsh continued, but the psychological evaluation shows she's already beginning to heal in your care. Dr. Susan Cervantes reports that Lily feels safe, secure, and genuinely loved for the first time in months. The judge turned to Carmen with barely concealed disgust. Mrs. Starr, your own recorded statements demonstrate a pattern of parental alienation, emotional manipulation, and willful endangerment of your child's welfare. The court finds that you are an unfit parent who placed your own selfish desires above your daughter's safety and well-being. Carmen started to protest, but her attorney put a restraining hand on her arm. Therefore, Judge Marsh declared, I am awarding full legal and physical custody of Lily Kruger to her father, Staff Sergeant Christoph Kruger. Mrs. Starr's parental rights are hereby terminated. You can't do this, Carmen screamed, jumping to her feet. She's my daughter too. Mrs. Starr, you forfeited any claim to motherhood when you allowed an abusive man to hurt your child and then lied about it under oath. This court will not enable you to continue using Lily as a pawn in your personal drama. Security guards moved forward as Carmen continued to shout threats and accusations, but Christoph barely registered the commotion. His attention was focused on the official documents that granted him everything he'd been fighting for, complete control over his daughter's life and future. Outside the courthouse, Bernice Kruger waited with Lily, who was now 9 years old and thriving under the stable care of her father and grandmother. She'd gained weight, her nightmares had stopped, and she was excelling in her new school. How did it go, Daddy? Lily asked as they walked to the car. You're staying with me forever, Princess. No one can ever take you away again. That evening, as Lily played in the backyard with the new puppy Christoph had bought her, he reflected on the total victory he'd achieved. Carmen's parental rights were terminated. Vernon was a broken man living in another state, and his daughter was safe from both of them permanently. But Christoph's greatest satisfaction came from knowing that both Carmen and Vernon would carry the scars of their encounter with him for the rest of their lives. Vernon had indeed left town, but Christoph's network of contacts ensured that his reputation followed him wherever he went. Every job application was met with mysterious rejections. Every attempt to rent an apartment resulted in sudden unavailability. Every woman he tried to date somehow learned about his history with disturbing detail. Vernon Waters had become a ghost, living on the margins of society, forever looking over his shoulder and remembering the man who had systematically destroyed his life as punishment for hurting a child. Carmen's fate was arguably worse. She'd moved to Phoenix, hoping to start fresh, but the internet was forever. Her fake documentary interview had been uploaded to social media platforms where it accumulated millions of views and thousands of comments expressing disgust at her narcissism and cruelty. Every potential employer who Googled her name found the video. Every man who showed interest in dating her received anonymous messages with links to her greatest hits. She'd become a cautionary tale, a viral example of what happened to bad mothers who abandoned their children. More importantly, both Carmen and Vernon now understood that Christoph Kruger was not a man who forgave, forgot, or moved on. He was a predator who eliminated threats to his family with surgical precision and permanent effectiveness. 6 months after the final court hearing, Christoph received a letter forwarded through military channels. It was from Vernon, postmarked from a small town in Montana. I think about what you did to me every day. I understand now that you could have killed me instead of just destroying my life, and maybe I should be grateful for your restraint. I will never forget the lesson you taught me, and I will never threaten another child as long as I live. I hope someday you can find it in your heart to call us even. Christoph read the letter once, then fed it into his paper shredder. Vernon still didn't understand the fundamental truth about the kind of man he'd crossed. Christoph Kruger didn't do even. He did complete victory or total destruction, with no middle ground. Carmen had never written, never called, never attempted any contact since the termination of her parental rights. According to the private investigator Christoph, still employed to monitor her activities, she was working as a waitress in Phoenix, living alone in a studio apartment, and had become something of a local joke among the dating scene there. She'd learned her lesson the hard way. Some men were not safe to betray. As Christmas approached, Christoph watched Lily help her grandmother decorate the tree. She was happy, healthy, and secure in the knowledge that she was loved unconditionally by people who would protect her no matter what. "Daddy," Lily said, hanging a handmade ornament on a low branch, "do you think Mommy misses me?" It was a question she asked occasionally, and Christoph always answered it honestly but gently. "I think she probably does, sweetheart. But sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt the people they love, and then they have to live with the consequences." "Do you think she'll ever come back?" "No, princess. She won't be coming back." "Good," Lily said simply. "I like our family the way it is now." That night, after Lily was asleep, Christoph stood on his mother's porch and called his commanding officer to discuss his next deployment. He'd been on emergency leave for 6 months, and it was time to return to his real work. "The situation here is resolved, sir," he reported. "My daughter is safe and in permanent custody. I'm ready to return to active duty." "Outstanding, Kruger. We've got a situation in Eastern Europe that could use your particular skill set." As Christoph planned his return to military service, he felt the satisfaction of a mission completed flawlessly. He'd identified threats to his family, neutralized them completely, and ensured they could never pose a danger again. Carmen and Vernon had learned what happened to people who threatened Christoph Kruger's family. They'd been systematically destroyed, physically and psychologically, in a campaign of revenge that left no room for mercy or second chances. More importantly, anyone else who might consider hurting his daughter now had a very clear example of the consequences they would face. Christoph Kruger was many things: soldier, father, protector. But above all, he was a man who understood that some threats required permanent solutions. The war was over, and he had won it completely. Chapter 9. New Beginnings, Old Warnings. 5 years had passed since the custody battle, and Lily Kruger was now 14 years old, a confident, intelligent young woman who bore no resemblance to the frightened, broken child she'd once been. She excelled in school, played volleyball, and had never once asked to see her mother or Vernon again. Christoph had completed 2 more deployments during those years, but he'd also made a decision that prioritized his role as a father. He transitioned from active special operations to a training position at Fort Bragg, allowing him to be present for the important moments in Lily's life while still serving his country. "Dad, there's something I need to tell you," Lily said one evening as they sat on the porch of their new house. A modest but comfortable home in a good school district where Lily had made genuine friends and found stability. Christoph looked up from a military manual he'd been reviewing. At 38, he was still the same dangerous man who destroyed Carmen and Vernon, but fatherhood had softened some of his edges. "What's on your mind, princess?" "Carmen contacted me." The temperature on the porch seemed to drop 10 degrees. Christoph's expression didn't change, but Lily had inherited enough of his intelligence to recognize the stillness that meant her father was calculating threats. "Ow!" His voice was perfectly calm, but Lily heard the controlled danger beneath it. "Social media. She found my Instagram account and sent me a message saying she was my real mother and that you'd stolen me from her with lies." Christoph's hands remained steady, but his mind was already working through contingencies. Carmen's parental rights had been terminated, and any attempt to contact Lily violated multiple court orders. "What did you tell her?" "Nothing. I blocked her immediately and took screenshots of everything she sent." Lily pulled out her phone and showed him the messages. "Dad, I remember everything that happened when I was little. I remember how she chose Vernon over me, how she let him hurt me, how she said terrible things about you." Carmen's messages were pathetic attempts at manipulation, trying to paint herself as a victim who'd been tricked by evil lawyers and a vindictive ex-husband. She claimed to have changed and deserved a chance to rebuild their relationship. "I'm proud of you for handling this correctly," Christoph told his daughter. And I want you to know that you never have to see or speak to that woman again if you don't want to. I don't want to, Lily said firmly. You and Grandma Bernice are my family. Carmen is just someone who gave birth to me. That evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Christoph made a phone call to his private investigator, the same one who'd been monitoring Carmen's activities for the past 5 years. She's in Virginia, Ricky Stratton reported. Moved back about 2 months ago. She's been asking around about you and Lily, trying to find out where you live. Any indication she's planning something beyond social media contact? She's been talking to a legal aid attorney about challenging the termination of her parental rights. Claims she was coerced into signing papers she didn't understand. Christoph wasn't surprised. Carmen had always been delusional about her own culpability, and 5 years of failure and isolation had probably convinced her that her problems were someone else's fault. I'll take care of it, Christoph said. The next morning, Carmen Starr was surprised to find a familiar figure waiting in the parking lot of the diner where she worked her morning shift. Christoph leaned against his truck, looking exactly as dangerous as he had the day he destroyed her life 5 years earlier. Hello, Carmen. She froze, her face cycling through fear, anger, and desperate hope. Chris, I've been trying to reach you. I know we had problems before, but I've changed. I want to see my daughter. Your daughter? Christoph's voice carried the same deadly calm that had once preceded the destruction of her entire world. You don't have a daughter. Your parental rights were terminated 5 years ago. That was a mistake. I was manipulated by lawyers, and you were recorded admitting that you viewed Lily as a meal ticket and hoped I would die in combat, so you wouldn't have to deal with custody issues. There was no manipulation, Carmen. Just truth. Carmen's desperation overrode her fear. I have rights. I'm her biological mother. You have no rights. You forfeited them when you chose an abusive boyfriend over your child's safety. I'll fight you in court again. I'll prove you poisoned her against me. Christoph stepped closer, and Carmen instinctively backed away. Even after 5 years, her body remembered what this man was capable of. Let me explain something to you very clearly, he said quietly. Lily is 14 years old now. She remembers everything that happened. She remembers you taking her lunch money for spa treatments. She remembers Vernon hitting her while you did nothing. She remembers you telling her that her father was never coming home. Carmen's face crumpled. She was just a baby. Children forgive. Lily blocked your social media contact and reported it to me immediately. She doesn't want to see you, Carmen. She doesn't want to know you. You are a stranger to her, and that's exactly what you deserve to be. You can't keep me from my own child. I'm not keeping you from anything. Your daughter is choosing to have nothing to do with you because she understands what kind of person you are. Christoph pulled out his phone and showed Carmen a photo from the previous weekend. Lily laughing with friends at a volleyball tournament, healthy and confident and surrounded by people who genuinely cared about her. This is what she looks like now, he said. Happy, successful, loved. Everything she never was when she was with you. Carmen stared at the photo with a mixture of longing and jealousy. She's beautiful. She's everything you could never be. Honest, loyal, and genuinely caring about other people. Chris, please. I know I made mistakes, but this is the only warning you're going to get, Christoph interrupted. Stay away from my daughter. Don't contact her. Don't try to see her. Don't ask other people about her. If you violate the court order again, if you cause her even a moment of distress, I will remind you why you spent 5 years running from your own shadow. Carmen looked into his eyes and saw the same cold calculation that had orchestrated her complete destruction years earlier. She was older now, more broken, and infinitely more aware of what this man could do to someone who threatened his family. I understand, she whispered. Do you? Because 5 years ago, you thought you understood too. You thought I was just a deployed soldier who couldn't protect his family. You were wrong then, and if you test me again, you'll discover that I've only gotten better at what I do. Christoph got back in his truck and drove away, leaving Carmen standing in the parking lot with the devastating knowledge that her daughter was lost to her forever. That evening, Lily found her father in his home office, cleaning his service pistol, a ritual that usually meant he was processing stress or anger. Is everything okay, Dad? Everything's fine, Princess. I just had a conversation with someone who needed to understand some boundaries. Carmen. Christoph looked at his daughter with pride. She was sharp, perceptive, and unafraid to ask direct questions, qualities that would serve her well in life. She won't be bothering you again. Good. I don't want her drama in our lives. 6 months later, Carmen Starr was found dead in her apartment from an apparent drug overdose. The investigation revealed a pattern of prescription pill abuse and alcohol dependency that had accelerated after a failed attempt to reconnect with her daughter. Christoph felt no satisfaction at the news, only the cold closure of seeing a threat permanently neutralized. Carmen had destroyed herself with the same selfishness and poor judgment that had cost her everything she'd once claimed to value. Vernon Waters had lasted longer, but not much better. 3 years after leaving Virginia, he'd been arrested for assaulting a bartender who'd refused to serve him. The assault charge led to a parole violation, which led to a lengthy prison sentence. He died in prison 2 years later, stabbed by another inmate who'd taken exception to Vernon's reputation as someone who hurt children. Both of the people who'd threatened Lily's safety and happiness were now gone. Their lives ended by the same character flaws that had brought them into conflict with Christoph in the first place. As Lily prepared for high school graduation and looked forward to college, she had no idea about the fates of her biological mother and former stepfather. Christoph saw no reason to burden her with information that would serve no constructive purpose. She was happy, successful, and surrounded by people who loved her unconditionally. That was all that mattered. On graduation day, as Christoph watched his daughter accept her diploma as valedictorian, he reflected on the choices that had brought them to this moment. He'd chosen to protect his family through overwhelming force and permanent solutions. Some people might call his methods extreme, but those people had never watched their child suffer at the hands of cruel, selfish adults. Lily hugged him after the ceremony, holding her diploma and smiling with genuine joy. "Thank you for everything, Dad. For protecting me, for believing in me, for never giving up on our family. I'll always protect you, Princess, no matter what it takes." As they drove home from graduation, Christoph allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. His daughter was safe, his enemies were defeated, and anyone who might consider threatening his family in the future had been given a very clear demonstration of the consequences they would face. Christoph Kruger was many things: soldier, father, guardian. But above all, he was a man who understood that some people forfeited their right to mercy the moment they chose to hurt innocent children. The war had been won completely, and the peace that followed was built on the permanent defeat of those who dared to threaten what he held most dear. Justice, in the end, was not about forgiveness or second chances. Sometimes it was about making sure that bad people faced consequences severe enough to deter anyone else from making the same mistakes. Lily was safe, and she would remain safe because her father was the kind of man who never forgot a threat and never forgave an enemy. That was enough. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.